of you not understand these instructions?" Somewhere between where Burns was standing and where my final pace would take me, there was an empty cigarette packet on the ground, but from where I was I couldn't tell the brand, and for some reason this suddenly seemed oddly vexing. The station official waited a sensible amount of time for either second to voice a concern or query. Both remained resolutely silent. The official nodded to the doctor, who stood off to one side, and after one last inquiring glance to each party, continued. "Very well. 1. The thought occurred to me as I set off that, if I stretch my stride slightly, I would be able to reach a point where I'd be able to make out the lettering on the cigarette packet. I adjusted my pace accordingly, but stepped carefully. A heavy frost still lay unmelted on the platform surface. 2. The trouble was that the few brands available prior to my departure had, since I'd been away, been joined by a proliferation of new cigarette brands, which, in an attempt to win favour with the short-sighted purchaser, had based their design on those of the established manufacturers. Somewhere on one of Waterloo's other functioning platforms, an early service from Paris hissed to a halt, whistling its arrival cheerily. I imagined newspapers being folded, cases grasped, coats donned, hats carefully seated on heads. 3. The industrialization of London seemed to have grown apace, with smaller engines appearing to be more commonplace than they were when I left for America. The military had, of course, retained the monopoly on the more complicated engines, the specifications of which were still secret. However, partial declassification of the technology involved had led to many smaller companies being able to compete beyond their natural reach and had instigated a commercial revolution. At least, that was what it had said in the in-flight magazine that I'd glanced at on the way over from Canada. From what I had seen of London so far, it seemed mainly to mean more smoke. 4. The name was Victoria, or perhaps Victory. Either would make an obvious title for a patriotic brand of tobacco. It made me think of one of the first patrols I'd undertaken in my posting. My section had come across a little village, barely more than a collection of shacks and lean-tos, and almost certainly inhabited by the French speakers who populated that area of the Canadian provinces. 5. Given what we'd been told about local sentiments, I'd been astounded to discover an almost life-sized picture of Her Majesty adorning the largest hut. I mentioned this symbol of heartening patriotism to my sergeant, a veteran of the region, who responded to my question with a short laugh. "Bless you, sir," he said, "that's the name of the gin they make round here." 6. Some weeks afterwards, I was informed by a fellow officer that I'd acquired the nickname Ginny Maddox. It was the last time that I had hazarded an opinion about the locals in earshot of my sergeant. Something buzzed sharply past me, and I was puzzling over its source when the sound of a shot echoed through the platform. Pausing in my stride, I cautiously put a hand to my shoulder, and it was only when I saw it covered in a bright smear of blood that I realized what had happened. I was about to turn when another sound distracted me. I looked ahead and saw Burns collapse, gasping to his knees. I turned to the official who had begun proceedings. "If you will continue counting, sir. But, I mean, continue the count, if you please." 7, the official continued, more uncertainly than before. I recommenced my pacing, feeling the pain and warmth spread out across my neck and shoulder as blood began to slowly seep into the cloth of my jacket. 8. Over the years, an increasing number of rituals and restrictions had been crafted to differentiate what happened at Waterloo dueling grounds from the more common act of murder as practiced by grubbier protagonists in the rest of the capital. One of these, the embargo against weapons produced after 1815, lent a confidence to my careful pacing that I might not have felt had we been